Hello, fellow artists and art lovers. I wanted to share with you some of the beauty outside of my studio window today. It's a wintry morning, and although it's wintry and cold out, we're getting a lot of sunshine, and it's been a pretty gray winter. So the sunshine's very welcome, and it was filling my studio with light. And I was just inspired to come in and do a pastel painting based on this scene that I took. It's a photograph that I took outside on our property of the sun hitting the trunks of these pine trees and the snow and the needles that had fallen over the winter. And I just wanted to capture that light. So here you can see I'm starting right in. I'm not doing any kind of underpainting. What I'm using is a hard blue spruce new pastel, and the paper that I'm using is brown pastel matte. It's Clairefontaine pastel matte, and I'm not sure that you can find brown in sheets on its own. I think you have to buy it in a variety pack, and in this particular variety pack it was the Jeremy Ford pastel matte pad. I'm not sure where I bought it online, but I did buy it online, I remember that much, and it comes with a variety of other colors. But I wanted to use the brown because I thought it would be easier to kind of design not only the trees on, to give kind of a nice foil for all the green, because it's kind of an orangey brown, the paper is, that is. But also I wanted to have some of the brown on the ground, because this isn't a completely snow-covered ground, this scene isn't. And so I wanted to be able to have some of that brown of the old pine needles that were on the ground peeking through the snow, and I didn't want to have to draw all that in or paint all of that in. So I thought it would be easier to do this. If I were to paint this painting again, I think I would also try it on a dark charcoal or black colored paper. I think that would be a neat experiment to try and kind of see how I would alter my process. But as I said, I'm starting out by using this blue spruce hard new pastel, and now I'm starting to add some softer pastel. I like to use a harder pastel underneath, whether I'm going to do an alcohol underpainting and wet it down, or if I'm just going right in like I do usually when I'm doing a painting on pastel matte. I don't like to do an underpainting on pastel matte because the paper is already toned unless you use white pastel matte. And this paper is so wonderful, it just grabs that pastel. So it's not great for blending when you're first putting down layers. However, once you get a lot of layers down, you can do a little bit of blending if you really wanted to. But I find that it forces me to be a little bit more deliberate with my painting strokes. And I guess I can be a little bit more expressive, a little more bold using this paper. So it does sort of change the way I work. It's a nice change. So here you can see I'm starting to add in some of the blue greens that typify the needles on evergreen trees. There's a lot of different colors of greens. Some of the needles are going to be really deep blue green. Others are going to kind of be more yellowish green, depending on if, for example, the salts that are on our roads, in order to keep the snow melting and the ice from forming on our roads, can often harm the pine tree needles, especially if the trees are closer to a highway or a road. And so you'll see some trees will have more yellowed needles, and of course the needles may also fall off and turn colors too. I'm working on the foreground now. You can see that I'm starting to add in some of the look of those needles that are the colors that they might be on the ground. And I'm not being too literal with the colors that I see. I'm more thinking about just sort of generally the colors that I'm seeing, and also the values that I see in that area. I want to get some sky in pretty early, just so that I can kind of get a feel for how dark I need to go with my trees. Right now things are just barely blocked in with the trees, and I want to make sure that I'm leaving enough uncovered for my sky so that I don't get muddy color, but also to help me to set up my value map and to see how wide of a value range I'll get, because right now my darkest value is the blue spruce pastel that I started with, and my lightest value is this sky color. So it gives me kind of a set range to work within. Okay, so now I've got the sky blocked in with a really light blue. I'm going to go ahead and use that same blue in the snowy lane. It's perfectly fine to use that, and it's going to provide at least a cohesion between the sky and the ground plane. It's important for those to feel connected, and by using that same color, I'm automatically going to get some of that. I'll also use that and some other light blues to scumble across the foreground plane, and those will be just hinting at the snow that's still on the ground, even though you're seeing all of this detritus from pine needles and maybe some leftover deciduous leaves that have fallen in the past autumn. But we're going to get that blocked in, add a few sky holes in there, and that'll get changed as I add foliage and add and take away foliage and sky holes. Adding in the beginnings of the light effect on the tree trunk. That main tree trunk is one of my major focal points. The other focal point is the lane as it goes around the curve and into the trees in the distance. So I want to make sure that, I'm starting to establish my color intensities and my harder edges in those areas. It's a little early to be finishing all that, but I'm starting to establish it. I'll keep coming back to that. I like to work the entire painting as much as I can, and then towards the end of the process, really go into those areas of focus that I want the viewer to be drawn to, and really make those my hardest edges, and make those areas where I have the most intense colors and that sort of thing. I'm starting to add some of the brighter yellow-green massive needles. And notice that I'm not really painting needles, I'm painting clusters of foliage. And because of the way it's being painted, it's still going to read as evergreen trees, not as deciduous trees. And that's important. But I don't have to paint every needle in order to get that effect. And sometimes it's hard when you're first starting out to remember you don't have to paint every leaf or every needle in order to get the effect. You just really want to suggest and leave the rest up to the viewer. I'm going to be using a lot of different greens in this foliage. There's a nice blue green. Even in those clumps of foliage up by the sky, there are still going to be parts that are neutral green, if that's such a thing, and there are going to be parts that are going to be blue, more blue-green, and parts that are going to be more yellow-green. And so you have to kind of look for opportunities to turn the forms wherever you find them. And if you think of as a clump of foliage as an oblong shape, like up in the upper right-hand side where you see those boughs in the sky, you can think of, not all of those needles are going to be in direct sunlight, even though they're up higher, closer to the sky. You might think, oh, they're all going to be covered in sunlight. But the bottom sides, depending on if there are other boughs close by those boughs, some of those needles are not going to be receiving sunlight. They're going to be more of a blue-green. They're going to be cooler. Others will have more direct sunlight, and so they may be more of a neutral green or more of a yellow-green. And so you have to look for opportunities to help the viewer see what you want them to see by changing not just the value, but the color temperature of what you're painting. Now I'm starting to add in some of that warmer color on the foreground, and I want to gradually bring that up. I started with a base of kind of brick reds and some purples, and now my color temperature is getting warmer. So I'm going into my oranges, kind of yellow oranges or orangey reds. And on the tree trunk, I'm doing that same process. I had some kind of burnt sienna colors, and then some orange colors and some orangey yellows now. And that's just going to help the viewer to begin to see that transition from the darker side of the tree to the side of the tree that's receiving more light. Here I'm just adding a touch of a darker blue towards the upper part of the sky just to help transition that sky, and cleaning up some of the snowy areas as that lane turns. Adding some more of that golden light in places. Looking for places to add some more neutral colors. The color in my hand right now isn't really an orangey color, it's more of a sandy, neutral orange. But there's a place for that too. Not every color can be saturated. You know, you have to have a place for neutrals too. Otherwise, your saturated colors won't read as saturated. Everything will be too garish. Starting to add some of those branches that are coming forward out into that sunlight a little bit more. They're not being covered in shadow. They're not deep into the tree, and so that's giving the illusion that those boughs are coming forward to the viewer. I have to be very selective, which is why you see me turning to keep looking at my reference, because I want to make sure that it's helping me to decide where to put these things. I'm not trying to copy it, you know, inch by inch here. I'm really just looking at it for suggestions. And there comes a time when I just stop looking at the reference and I start paying attention more to the painting and how it's developing. And it will tell me, if I listen, what needs to be done to make it look the way that I'm wanting it to look. Okay, I'm doing some finishing touches on the foliage now, using some Terry Ludwig greens from my Richard McKinley landscape set and my Karen Margulis set. And I find these are just the perfect softness to go over all of the pastel I've already got down. I've used a pretty light touch with all of my work so far, and you don't have to work hard to get a lot of pastel down on Pastel Mat, because it really just grabs it. Unlike most sanded papers that, you know, you have a certain amount of pastel dust that falls off into your tray, with Pastel Mat there really isn't much of that that's going to happen, because this paper just grabs it so well, even the soft stuff. And so I'm just going back over all my foliage and making sure that I'm happy with what I see. Here's a Terry Ludwig eggplant, and I try to save that particular stick for my darkest accents. I don't make all of my darks this dark, because then my darks would be too dark. And so I try to save that particular stick for accents. Now it's time to refine the snow on the foreground. Right now I've just kind of suggested that there's snow there, but I do want to kind of look a little bit more, I want it to look a little bit more realistic, and I want it to look like there's more snow than there are needles or deciduous leaves from previous season. So I'm just kind of cleaning up the edge of this snowy lane. I want it to look like, you know, the lane comes around. It's not going to continue down off the right hand side of the page. Trying to touch up some of the colors that I want to see more of in the foreground. Here I've got my charcoal pencils out, a medium and a hard. I'm drawing in some branches. I'm darkening some accents on the trees. It just gives me a higher level of control for these very small marks that I need to make, so that I don't undo some of the work that I've already done. I was a little bit unhappy with some of the color that I was seeing on my foreground. I really wanted it to have a little bit more pop. So you can see this last color that I'm bringing out has really got a saturated orangey red look to it. But I'm liking it, and I'm applying it carefully, because I want it to draw the eye around kind of a path through the foreground up to that tree. So I'm using it wisely, hopefully, with the other colors there, trying to lead the viewer around the painting. So because I had to go back in and work on some of that color, kind of pump up the color in the foreground where the needles are laying on the ground, I wanted to go back in again with the snow and just make sure that I'm letting that snow sit on the ground in such a way that it looks like it's sitting um, in the ground almost. You know, it's whatever is sitting on the ground, like the needles and the leaves, some of that snow is going to be underneath. You know, some of those things are going to sit up higher on the ground, I guess is what I'm trying to say. So I'm trying to be a little bit more particular about how I'm placing that snow so that it kind of sits in closest to where the dirt actually is. I hope that makes sense. Here I've taken out a hard new pastel, just a white one, and it just gives me a little bit more control. Those little teeny tiny areas where I want there to be touches of white, where my Terry Ludwigs would just be too clunky. This is just a mechanical pencil. I'm just getting some fine branch work in here and there. Break up some of the sky area. Some more of those dark accents where I feel like they're needed. This is one of those pastels that I just save for that kind of a use. I don't use it all the time. It's sort of the darkest dark that I like to see, other than maybe using charcoal on my paintings. Save it for those final accents. Here's a really saturated orangey red that I just wanted to add a pop of color towards the bottom to lead the viewer's eye. I hope you enjoyed this, and I appreciate your watching. Have a great one.